Recently, after literally years that Peacekeeper was released, I decided to do all the steps to unlock it. Just like the majority of people that went through this process, I think, I've been following Jack Fragg's video tutorials, but after trying multiple times to get a conflict dog tag, I can say that in my opinion it is not such a difficult tag to get. To be honest, I think that with some tips and tricks, the whole mission can be completed in less than an hour. Unfortunately, these tips and tricks seem to be missing in Jack Fragg's tutorial. So, since surprisingly there is still people in empty servers trying to unlock the Peacekeeper even now in 2022, I'm doing this video to show you guys a faster and easier way to complete this task. So, if you're about to try to get the tag for the first time, or you already tried to do it but without any success, well, this video is for you. Okay, we are ready, but before we jump into it, let me just say sorry for my bad English. I know it could be a mess sometimes because I don't really speak it very often, but I hope you will still be able to understand what I will say. Okay, let's start now. First tip is that you should choose a hardcore server with fog or rain. If you use a server with sunny weather instead, the sunlight will annoy you and will make very difficult to see the lights into the floor, and if you are not in a hardcore server, it will be easier for trolls to, well, troll you. That's because, for example, some of them joins your team and start messing with buttons and you can't even kill them. Second tip is to have fun with limpet charges. Use them to destroy the candles instead of using melee attacks, and also use them while you are shooting to the other light sources, or even while you are solving the candles puzzle. This will be useful because it will break some walls and make much easier to walk around the chateau, and it will also destroy some other light sources for you. Place every limpet charge in between two different walls for more efficiency, since the explosion will destroy the closest walls to the charge. Next tip is to use an online solver for the candle puzzle. I know that this could sound trivial, and it probably is, but I still want to mention this because from what I've seen, some people actually don't know that these tools exist. Of course, link is down in description. Fourth tip is that in case you mess with candles and get lost, don't keep trying interacting with them randomly. You don't need it. You should rather wait like 4 minutes and the candles will reset and you will be able to try again, but using the solver. Next tip is about mapping the buttons outside the house to rows and columns of the grid. In particular, you should always interact with closest buttons to minimize the time you waste traveling from a button to the other. I think it will be clear with an example. As you can see from the video, here I'm pressing buttons number 1 and 2 and a light turns on. Now there are two possible scenarios. Button number 1 is the lights column and button number 2 is its row, or button number 1 is the row and button number 2 is the column. That's why we need another light using one of these two buttons. So now the most convenient pair of buttons to press is 2, 3, since 3 is pretty close to button number 2 and you will not have to spend time walking, right? Well, this is exactly what I'm doing here in the video, and another light shows up. As you can see, the light is in the same column of the first light, and since the button I pressed to turn on both these lights is number 2, it means that number 2 is the column these lights are into, while 1 and 3 are rows. Now I move to the further pair of buttons, which is 3, 4. And hey, look here, we have another light. This means that button number 4 is a column, and basically you just have to repeat this process to have all columns and rows mapped to buttons. Sometimes it could happen that a pair of buttons just does not have any effect, like in this case after I pressed 4, 5. This means that both of them controls rows or columns. At this point you basically have two options. If this happens when you already know what some buttons do, like in my case, because I already know buttons behavior from 1 to 4, then you also know what the unmapped button is. For example, in my case, I know that the 5 is a column because number 4 was a column too. So now To know what exact column is linked to button 5, I just press that button and the closest row button, which in my case is number 3. And there we go, another light is on and buttons 5 is done. The other option to handle this nothing happened case is to just move to the further pairs of buttons and come back to the unmapped buttons once you have mapped some others. This will be actually the only option available if the nothing happened case shows up when you press the very first buttons, and of course you have nothing to test with. This leads us to the next tip, that is, you don't have to always turn every light off after you turn it on. Leaving other lights turned on while you are mapping buttons will make easier to identify new lights' position, because you could also see them as relative positions to the other lights turned on. So you will probably think something like, oh, okay, this is in the same column as this one but 2 rows higher, instead of counting every time from 0. Yes, of course, with a lot of lights on it will be a mess, but at least for me a good solution is to map one side of the house, leaving lights on, and then turn everything off and proceed to map the buttons on the other side of the house. Another tip for this section is about what you should do if you mess with buttons. A very bad thing that could happen is when you don't click a button, even if you think you did, and in this case, for example, a sequence like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if you don't press properly, let's say button number 3, will become 1, 2, 4, 5 and so on, and every result you get during mapping will be just wrong. So be careful while you are pressing buttons, and if you do suspect that this happened, just interact with one button and check if something changed in the floor. If not, just repeat the process until you notice a light that turns on or off, and only at that point you can resume interacting with buttons because you will be synced with the server. Last tip is that you don't really need more graphs or people in spectator mode to map the sandbags. Just use your gun to put marks on the stairs and to divide each side in 8, 6 or 4 equal parts, and always start putting marks near a sandbag from its closest corner. This will reduce probability of making mistakes estimating the distances. Just work on each side at a time. For example, check the top side of the 8x8 square and you proceed to turn on the corresponding lights to reproduce the pattern. Then you check the second side of the same square and then turn on the lights and so on. Okay, I think we are done. With these tips I was able to get this dog tag in about 28 minutes from when I joined the server, including the time spent fixing some mistakes I made in the last part. But without errors, I think one could complete this thing maybe in about 20 minutes. So thank you for watching this video, I hope it was useful, and good luck if you are about to do your first try. See ya.